Here's my next guest. What's your name and what brings you to JCON?
Hello, my name is François Martin. I'm here at JCON because I give here a talk, and also I'm a volunteer, so I help the people to get their badges registered and so on in the morning.
A lot of volunteers I've seen. We already had a few of them here.
Cool.
Are you also involved in the JUC, or is it just here at the conference that you're volunteering?
Actually, not yet, but I was really considering it heavily. I mean, I also help organize the Hacker Garden in Switzerland sometimes, but apart from that, not really yet. But it's on my list definitely.
And you're the speaker?
Yeah,
What's
correct.
the topic?
So the topic is about flaky tests actually, and I'm doing it with Brian Demers together with him. I have to say, it really, looking at the preparations that we have done so far, I'm really looking forward to the talk tomorrow because I feel like it will be really great. I feel like it was a good decision to do it together with someone else, even though in the beginning, of course, it's always a bit of a risk doing it together with someone else. But it worked out really well, and I feel like the talk wouldn't have been as good if I would have done it by myself. So.
What is the definition of a flaky test? Sometimes it fails, sometimes it breaks?
Yeah, exactly. So it's essentially a test. If you run it multiple times, sometimes it fails and sometimes it passes. So.
And why? Could be different reasons, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we covered those in detail in our talk, but one of the very common reasons is, for example, what I see people doing a lot is, for example, they wait for 1 second. For example, they click a button and then they wait for 1 second, and then they see if something appears, a success message or something like this. And then the test fails if the load is quite high on the system, for example, or on the load of the build system. And then the test fails. And then if you run it locally or if you rerun it when there is less load on the build runners, then it's it's fine. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the very common reasons, but there are many more reasons, of course, why this could happen.
Is it a bad idea to have a wait in a test?
Not necessarily, but what you should do instead is wait for a certain action, and you should have a timeout in it. So, for example, you say you wait for the success message, but you say, for example, you wait for a success message to appear, and you have a timeout, for example, of 30 seconds. So then the test framework waits until it appears, and as soon as it appeared, it will continue. And there's another advantage that usually the tests are also faster if, for example, there is not that much load on the system. Because, for example, it could be that already in 200 milliseconds this is fulfilled. So, and then you're still waiting 1 second if you're waiting for a fixed interval. So,
the example you give is a UI test.
Yeah.
Is it using some library which is good to use in Java to do this, or is this an integration test? How do you set up such a system?
So in Java, there is, for example, Selenium, which is quite a classic that you can use for this. With Selenium, you can do this as well, where you can say you wait for something specifically. But there are also many other frameworks you can use that are not Java-based, for example, like WebDriver.io, or, even Cypress can do things like this, or a lot of other tools. Playwright is also a common one that gets used more and more now. So, yeah, but Selenium is like a classic that gets used quite a lot.
Probably the most known tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you're here as a speaker, but I guess you're also doing some visiting some other talks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you pick them, or is it just at random?
No, I picked them. So I looked at the schedule beforehand, and I really chose a few topics that really interested me, and I really would like to cover.
Can you share a few of them? What you're looking forward to?
Sure. What I'm looking forward to is a good question. I don't have it in my mind right now, but I remember I visited just earlier a talk from Gerrit, which was about garbage collectors, and this was really interesting because I'm not really up to date on the all of the types, and this really helped me in a way. And I also really enjoyed the talk by Merit, which was about reading code, which I feel like this skill is very important, that it's not talked about enough, as she also said in her talk. And I can really recommend this talk as well if somebody has the chance to see it. But I have to look at my list of the talks, then probably it will come into my mind again, okay, sure.
When you leave.
Yeah.
But I had Gerrit here just before his talk.
Interesting.
He was a bit wondering if it would not be too heavy,
okay.
because there are a lot of garbage collectors, so there's a lot of knowledge he wanted to share. It was the first time he gave this specific talk.
Okay.
Any feedback?
Yes, sure. I gave him some feedback already earlier, but I have to say, I feel like it was very well done in a way that the slides were very well structured. So there was a lot of information on there, but it was written in a way that is very easy to understand. He put it like in a tabulatory way, and it always used the same criteria. And it put next to it, for example, when was it introduced? When should you use it? When should you not use it? And I think this is a really handy reference when I need to, for example, choose which garbage collector to use. Then I can go through the slides and see which one fits best. I didn't fully understand all of the explanations around how the garbage collectors work themselves in detail. But in most cases, unless you're debugging some strange garbage collection issues, I think this will probably not be something that you need to really know about anyways. So
I think, and I said this before to a few people, you have a higher chance of finding an issue in your own code compared to the JDK, to the runtime.
Absolutely.
If something goes wrong, it's probably your own code.
Absolutely.
Almost falling for.
No problem. Don't worry.
The JDK as such is very stable, but there are issues. So it can happen indeed that you find a problem there. But before you find a problem there, probably need to look into your own code.
Absolutely. But it's surprising me always. I remember, I was a lecturer for around 2 years. And I remember in one of the classes I was teaching JavaFX. And there, for some reason, we found a bug in JavaFX itself. And I was totally surprised by that because, as you mentioned, usually you don't assume that the bug is in whatever library or whatever you're using. And I was so surprised that even students, especially students were able to find something.
And the nice thing is, if you can report it and make it reproducible, and that's, I think that's the biggest issue. If you find a bug, also in your own code, is how you make it reproducible. Even add it to a test so that you know that you have fixed it. And that's, I think, a nice challenge for every developer to be able to reproduce an error.
Absolutely. And I think this is also, if we go back to the flaky tests thing, this is also something that is very challenging with flaky tests. If you have a flaky test, usually it makes sense to reproduce it locally as well. But sometimes that's very difficult. I remember when I worked for a different company, I had one of the projects where we had an issue where actually on one of the build runners, it was failing, but locally it was running fine. And I tried to reproduce it as closely as I could. I used the same Docker containers, everything, and I couldn't get to reproduce it. And I was really stumped for a long time. And then, I had the idea of just SSHing into the build runner. And then I ran it, there, and then I was able to debug it this way. And this way, I found that the issue was actually, a concurrency issue where the machine on the build runner was not as fast or faster, I'm not 100% sure, something like that, than our machines where it was running on, which caused the test to fail. And you also need to be able to reproduce it to be able to fix the flaky test in most cases. I mean, unless it's something very simple, like with the 1 second delay, for example. If you know that this is something that is very flaky, then usually you don't need to reproduce it. But this is also always something that's very tricky, especially if you have cases like this where it's just about the infrastructure itself that is causing troubles.
We discussed it here before. You should get your tests as close as possible to the build and the runtime environment, like for instance with test containers. Can also help to avoid this kind of cases. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Guest in the podcast, and have fun at the conference.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it here.